Thank you, Simon, for coming on the podcast. How are you today?
Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Which technology you would now want to see from StarTech to come live in future?
Oh, that's easy. The one I want the most is anti-gravity.
Where exactly AI gets plugged in?
Yeah, unfortunately, the world AI has become somewhat corrupted.
Some of the developers have consumed the entire year's budget within 4 months.
Yeah, no, I think it's a cracking question. There are a whole bunch of really important questions around AI use.
After 60, you have decided that you want to be MVP, right? Hey, Simon, thank you so much for attending our podcast, Debug with the Monk. And it's really a pleasure to welcome you to our podcast. Let me give a quick introduction of you to the team and the audience. Simon is 60-plus-year-old young guy who has actually been in an entrepreneurship streak with 4 companies already. And he is having prestigious MVP title. We would like to decode some portion of that. What does that entail? And most of all, why I'm really excited about talking to Simon personally is that he has actually worked in multiple verticals like healthcare, sustainable energy, AI. So there are a lot of things that I really want to gain knowledge on. So thank you, Simon, for coming on the podcast. How are you today?
Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so Simon has this pretty good cabin that he works out of. He has been working from home for the last 20 years. I have always been amazed by the work from home setup that he has. Lovely setup. I think one day, maybe I'll try to mimic or copy. I'll potentially share a copyright material for you. Yeah. So after 60, you have decided that you want to be MVP, right? Sorry, I'm saying 60 again and again, but it's just a very motivational number to me personally. But you look 40. So almost similar age like me. So, so from physics to MVP, what does that entail?
Yeah, I mean, in this wonderful phrase, I came to a fork in the road and I chose the longer road. It must be my route. It's never been a straightforward, obvious career progression for me. I did indeed train as a physicist. I've got a physical science undergrad degree and a postgrad in physics and chemistry. Spent a year, really 2 years teaching secondary school while I figured out what I wanted to do, and then ended up by complicated means working in one of the world's largest medical device companies. That was Smith & Nephew, who are in my current hometown. So again, even within that 15-year span that I was in big corporate, my career was not straightforward. I ran laboratories, I was an ISO 9000 auditor. Gosh, what did I do after that? Oh, I ended up in product development. I have 2 patents on the wall. You can't quite see them, but there are 2 patents on the wall from things that I invented while there. And then I ended up, bizarrely, in international marketing, which I have no background. I'm a dedicated tech guy, but mostly not IT tech. But I ended up in product marketing and ended up running the biggest product in the companies globally, and setting out the biggest evidence-based wound care symposium that had ever been run in the sector. So this goes back to my sort of scientific evidence-based approach. Everyone else is doing, influence people marketing. It's like, I just want to actually build a great case, based on evidence, and let the facts speak for themselves. So what? That wasn't obvious. Actually, working all today with big data and data science, and we were trying to do some really clever things around tracking and forecasting what would happen in wounds when you tried to heal them. And unfortunately, there wasn't enough compute power in the world at the time to do what we wanted or body. Today we could spin it off and it was, in a couple of hours, but then we didn't have enough computing power, so it didn't quite go where we wanted. I left there, ended up being picked up by an IT company that wanted to boost their health division. Ran that for a few years, fell out with them. We'll talk about that another time. And that was the prompt for me to set up my own company. So my first company, Cloud2, was a game-changing SharePoint consultancy. I had this idea that you didn't have to build every SharePoint intranet from scratch. You could have a standard model, a framework, but do about 80% of what every company needed, and then just spend all your money on the 20% that was a bit different. And so when we started that, we were one of perhaps 2 companies in the world who were taking that approach. When I exited the business about 12 years later, there were over 100 companies with exactly that model in the UK alone. So that was my first of 4 for startup companies.
Amazing, right? So I was reading about it, and you have a pretty long bio in your LinkedIn, and it's very amazing to read about the entire experience. And the last line actually impressed me a lot, which is like, his conference speaker byline is talks too much and stays too long.
And we'll get to the
You
evidence of that.
So my query is, Simon, that the exposure has been really brilliant in terms of talking about templatizing SharePoint
Yeah.
sites and whatnot, right? But did that lead you to MVP? Where did you heard about MVP when you started?
Well, so we're going in part two. I'll make this transition from science and healthcare into building SharePoint-based solutions. And we're not in only technology, and there's a complicated story about why we went down the SharePoint thing with the IT company that I joined and then left. But with my old Cloud 2 company, I always wanted our technical director to be an MVP. You have been an MVP, but we want to manage to afford him to put the extra community effort in. Meanwhile, I was attending community conferences. I was doing a lot of SharePoint Saturdays and getting involved in the community. But it really wasn't occurred to me, and I didn't have the time as a company director to pursue that. I did, however, get involved in setting up what became M365 North. It went through a few name changes, but that's a user group that myself, Simon Doyle, and at the time, Paul Galler set up a long time ago. I mean, that's 14 years old as a user group. And we set it up because we thought it was interesting. It was a great way to share information out into the community, and it helped us learn as much as it helped the attendees learn. And so we were running that. So we were doing that, and then pretty much during the pandemic, my colleague Simon, and also a separate company, he's another entrepreneur. It's complicated having all these Simons in the business. Simon Doyle and I saw a call out on Twitter from my model MVP, or from an MVP, because neither of us were MVPs, Mark Anderson, who's really well known, to try and do something with creating a new version of a maturity model. And that immediately piques my interest because I've been really on a maturity model for our SharePoint developments. We're taking the maturity model for SharePoint and we built on that and we're using it on our own. So we find that we can expand it into the whole of M365, instantly caught my attention and caught Simon Dory's attention as well. We put our hands up and we started working on this with Mark and a bunch of others, all really worthy people in that community organization. But we're just done for the interest of it. And then we started talking to other people going, yeah, this is really great tool, helping them adopt it in their businesses or in their consulting or just getting involved. And at the end of the pandemic, pretty much the first major conference that there was, European Collaboration Summit. Fantastic. The European conference. It was held in Dusseldorf. Simon and I and two other guys drove over to MINV as attendees. And a couple of weeks before, I'd been helping a Swedish guy. Bizarrely, yet another Simon. He was Swedish MVP. I've been helping him with the maturity model. We were having a beer at the conference, and we were saying, how long have you been an MVP? I'm not an MVP. I ran a user group, but he just said, we should be. And he proposed me the day after. So that was my route, and we found like a long route to get there. But the reforms yours, some great MVPs, in my opinion, are not those who set out to become MVPs, but probably doing community stuff just because it's the right thing to do and the interesting thing to do. And then at some point, someone will go, you ought to be an MVP because you're doing all this stuff while you're not. So that was my route. Subsequently, I've actually proposed 4 people to become MVPs on that exact basis. Simon Doyle was one, Dr. Isaacson was one, Dawn Holmes, who now helps us run the user group, is one, and I literally, perhaps I don't want to say all the sources, all the world really gets it, but I literally just, 3 weeks ago proposed a go out in Cyprus. So we've done that. A couple of things there, of those people who we have come to know, like Simon, who recommended me, they went, oh, that's interesting, you're doing all these MVP things. you should be part of the community, but also notice that it's truly an international community. It's not geographically bound. We're all talking with folk all over the world, and we go, Cyprus, there aren't many MVPs in Cyprus. We should do something about that.
So, Simon, this is really great. So, one thing that I have understood, and that is something that I've been trying to clear out for the audience, is that first thing, you have to be passionate. You build something, and in a specific technological stack related to Microsoft, doesn't matter what, right? Become a subject matter expert so that you have the primary knowledge about it. And third, you have to be recommended by another MVP. So, is that understanding correct? Or
I think that's correct. I think the building something requires a bit of nuance. Although SharePoint has always been my area of expertise, and I probably am an expert. And the wider M365 platform, at various points, I have had expertise. Actually, the stuff I build is not tech. What I build is the interface between technology and business. So absolutely, if you're a technical MVP, if that's your area, go and build integrations or APIs or tooling or whatever it is. But the world has changed. I have always been as much about the business as I am about the technology, and my interest was always the interaction of the two. And so I'll build, if anything, I build tools and processes that let organizations adopt technology, but also modify technology to be suitable for businesses. And I think that that's the thing is something that Microsoft are not great at. I've got a lot of time for Microsoft, but I think they build some great tech, but their understanding of how businesses work is constrained. And they're often not very good at melding the tech to be adoptable in all. And we see that in their branding missteps, and we see that in some of their UI missteps, and we see that in their flip-flopping between focusing on big enterprise and then realizing that actually most of the corporate world is small business. And they solve that often quite poorly. So my job is to look at the Microsoft technologies as they come out, especially the new things that are rough around the edges, things like Copilot and right now Skills and Co-work. Fantastic technologies, rough around the edges, often with variable, inconsistent and opaque UIs. And figure out how they should best be adopted for the early adopter organizations, especially the smaller ones that haven't got unlimited resources to throw at getting it right.
So on that point, right, since we have touched the buzzword of AI, so I'd like to expand on that. So what is the intersection you're talking about between AI and energy? What kind of hue that we can buy?
Not the first time I've been asked that. And we just need to remember that my sustainable energy company, it's a not-for-profit, it's really small. Really small. It's a micro company, possibly a nano company, although it has quite a lot of impact. It's a commercial enterprise, it's tiny. Because we're tiny, there are very limited. In fact, I'll tell you, the business currently has £4.75 in the bank. Which is a joke, really, but we haven't got a commercial model that earns us lots of money. So we've got a very small team. We've just taken on an intern for the summer period. So part of the question is, how can we do the things we need to do at some kind of scale when you've got no money and hardly any people? And so part of that is AI. I use AI to help me enormously to build content, to build campaigns, to build communications in a way that we would have required a team of probably 10 or 12 people 5 years ago. I've literally last night published a 40-page everything you should know as a householder about about sustainability. 40 pages, and that's a lot of stuff, and it's data-driven, and it's opinionated, and it covers all the questions that people need to ask, and Copilot and I have built that in the course of about 2 weeks. It's a big document. So using AI in the way that is kind of obvious as a productivity tool, but also using it to fact check and pull the evidence is good. And I've just got one more thing I need to do before I really start to push it, which is all the sort of skills files. I forget the guy's name, but one of the Microsoft guys has built a review board, a co-work review board based on a bunch of skills. And my final thing is I need to drop that into my tenant and then push my 40-page handbook to the review board, and and you work on the feedback gives me. So I'm using AI in those ways, build the things, but also give me the kind of professional level review that I can't get so easily with limited resources. So that's one thing. The next thing, though, is actually looking at the next stage. I'm obviously a bit of a geek and an early adopter and know my tech and I know my sustainability. And if you looked at the home assistant setup I've got and all the tech I've got in the house, this would support where I'm at. And even my wife, bless her, has become a bit of a geek and does use the tools that we've got. But most people are not like that. So how do we help ordinary households who are just not that interested, but really need all the benefits that the sustainable technology brings us? How do we help them get on board with it without them having to spend their time and limited, limited attention span, call it, to be able to learn how to do it all? And the answer is we should be building AI-enabled sustainability tools. And that means, when I'm helping people with do they buy solar and, how much gain every return will that give them, I and other organizations are using AI for that. Should they be putting on a heat pump? It's a very challenging technology, really good, but fairly challenging and quite expensive. There's a really great company called Heat Geek. They train heat pump installers. They don't do it themselves, but they've developed an AI-driven zero cost model to say, if you don't want to spend any money doing your heat pump, £7,500 UK government grant that you get for a heat pump, they can do an AI model that will tell them what they'll get without spending any money. And I think those are the kind of approaches that AI has a really big impact on, and is using AI to make this kind of technology, this kind of life change accessible to ordinary people. And then you go off the scale and go, and what would that mean for the whole ecosystem? AI is running our grids to an extent, is doing active forecasting on wind and solar, and using that to predict when we're going to have outages. There are companies like Axel who are now paying homes like me, or producers like me, significant amounts of money in the scheme of things to act as a virtual power plant and balance the grid, because they can look at where the peaks are going to be, where the potential turn down or turn up events are going to be, and ask people like me with solar and batteries to do things to balance the grid. Again, lots of that stuff is seriously AI driven. So we've got all the individual levels. That's all we're all doing individually to help us run the business. There's things that households could be doing or are embedded in the the take they're buying to help them. And on these grid scale forecasting tools and analytics tools, things like Octopus's, Kraken technologies, heavily AI driven, built on a massive data science based data warehouse. I mean, that's what we are now. A lot of the stuff that we think is, sort of chat GPT, LLM type AI, it's only the surface. There's all this deep stuff going on behind it.
With the IoT, with AI, right? Where is the advancement that is there? IoT is sending up or capturing a lot of data, like you talked about pump or scenario, or you're talking about other use cases. Where exactly AI gets plugged in this scheme of things?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the world AI has become somewhat corrupted. So all that IoT stuff, and if you look at, I've got something like 100 devices on my network, most of which are pushing data into the cloud on my home assistant server.
Right.
So large amounts of data are being created. They're being pushed into small or large data warehousey data stores, and what we're really running here is data analytics and data science against those. We tend to refer to analytics and data science as just being part of AI. I think that's wrong. I don't know at the consumer level saying it's AI, but what we've really got are really smart data scientists using AI to do analytics.
Yeah, it's like machine learning that we are plugging in.
Yes,
With respect. Now, since we're speaking on this subject, right, and there are very recent reports that are coming in. I haven't validated the authenticity of these news, but it's everywhere on LinkedIn or other social media channels in the news, is that some of the bigger organizations have kind of paused subscriptions like cloud subscriptions and whatnot, because some of the developers have consumed the entire year's budget within 4 months, right? First question that comes to my mind, like, how exactly one should use AI?
Yeah, no, I think it's a sort of a cracking question. There are a whole bunch of really important questions around AI use, not least of which is actually the sustainability of the data centers that are running, but that's probably a different conversation. So we're obviously, we have a classic sort of adoption curve, with the early adopters, and you've got that sort of picture display where where interest wanes a bit as we realize how hard it is, and you start to get the rise of the early majority and so forth. So it's a great curve. You definitely should put it in the podcast if there's visuals. But I think we're entering a pit of despair. And I think that's entirely predictable because, like so much new technology, and something we've been talking about a lot in the industry, the AIs are being rolled out with minimal governance. Minimal governance about the source data, minimal governance about who gets to use them in what way, minimal governance about tracking the benefits and costs. And now we're seeing the consequences of that. It happens all your damn time. Cloud was like that, all technology was going through this same curve. So I think that this stuff is probably necessary when the finance directors, some of the costs, that's the point at which they start kicking some bottoms in order to put controls, governance in place to make sure things are used wisely and intelligently, and that people use them with care and in an informed way. So we're going through that right now. You actually, if you're looking at the maturity model that we've referred to, we're starting to enter organizations needing to become level 400 in order to be able to manage the technical and financial impact. I think that we are going through the learning curve, and we'll come out of it stronger and better and more considered, and we will fall back into the AI platforms to make them better at doing this stuff. But it's going to be fairly brutal for a while.
This brings a thought, like whether we are using AI wrongly. See, nowadays the reach of AI is such that, specifically in India, I'm sure it's everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So I was reading this spoof on Instagram somewhere where there is a small kid who was actually saying, "Oh, my mother is, bringing me up in the world using ChatGPT," right? So, so that kind of reach that we see, right? So any thoughts that come to the mind, it straight away gets sponged into the ChatGPT or the Claude of the world, right? Which brings to me to the next point, which is like, are we using it wrongly? Like, for example, AI is supposed to do solve a specific problem statement, right? Maybe keep a thinking hat on, and then improvise the results that are coming in, and then help you brainstorm. But it has more like become a kind of an automation tool where you can just have a very simple piece of code, as you just mentioned, right? A VS Code which can actually automate things up. It will not utilize any token. It will not consume.
Yeah.
But is it something or that is sort? I'm sorry, I'm adding my opinion piece to it, but that is what I'm seeing on and on, because the way developers are consuming tokens so rapidly, and businesses are consuming their subscription credits. What could be the optimal way of utilizing it?
Of course, we're using it wrongly. I mean, I think that's inevitable because that's how we learn. So we're definitely using it wrongly, and there's usually something that looks like an 80-20 rule in play. So I reckon 20% of people are probably using it about right, and probably, using it about right about 20% of the time. I literally use Copilot dozens of times a day, maybe hundreds of times a day. There are a few of those things I could have done using Bing or Google to find answers. Although actually the reason I use Copilot as my research engine is it gets me sophisticated answers, not just information, but actual answers, probably about 5 times faster than I could do it using a search engine. But I tend to research things that I know something about. Or I can use my critical thinking skills that I have acquired through my my scientific background to then assess the answers it gives me. And man, Copilot and I disagree a lot of the time. I wish that it would listen to me when I told it that it's talking nonsense and learn from that, because it doesn't. I think that part of the problem is that people overtrust the genie in the bottle. not realizing that the genie is not perfect and doesn't understand everything. It neither understands you very well, nor does it understand all the information it has at its disposal very well. So I think we have a risk that people use it wrongly because they don't know how to ask the right question and don't understand the answer when it's given to them, and perhaps over trust it because it feels like magic.
Yeah. I remember I was taking a tube in Delhi sometime back, and there was this troubled youth who was just sitting next to me, and
Well,
he had some sort of a issue, and he was pasting it in the chat GPT, and he was getting the answers. He was thinking it's resolving it. So at the end of the day, it's over trusting the information that is coming in instead of. So it has pros and cons, I believe, and I think the AI has really a lot of power in terms of correcting some of these. Like for example, there was very recent case where a student just clicked a photo of the exam paper and said, "Give me the answer to this," right? And OpenAI has put some sort of algo in the back which says, "No, it appears you are in an exam, so I cannot give you an answer."
nice.
So, what are your thoughts around it? What is going wrong, or what needs correction, and how can we correct it?
I guess my third thing is, when it comes to ethics and morals, both of those, which we can collectively call morals, I think the problem is people. And the problem is all people. Even the most moral of us still sometimes do things which are against our principles because we're pretty damn flawed as creatures. So I'm not answering your question yet, but I won't go off on it anyway. I've been working basically since AI, like ChatGPT first launched, so 3 years ago in a bit, pondering how it is we can actually make AI is more ethical. The way we do it at the moment is flawed. I mean, it's the only thing we've got, but it's flawed. At the moment, AIs are amoral. They have no sense of morality. They just have knowledge. And what we do is the platforms put in safeguards, guardrails at the front and the back of the process. So if I'm saying to ChatGPT, tell me how to build an atomic bomb, it'll say, no, I won't do that. And it happens I know how to build an atomic bomb. That doesn't help. And that's because somebody has decided that's what the kind of question you should ask an AI because it will tell you. And then sometimes, because AIs are stochastic in nature, they produce probabilistic outcomes, sometimes you can get it to give you an answer which is immoral, or unethical, even if I asked it a reasonable question. And so I have another set of guardrails on the output. So if the answer that it's not given reasonable and ethical, does it meet our criteria? And if not, it buzzes it back through to try again. My issue with that is the AI itself has no idea of the ethics involved, and somebody is choosing what those guardrails are. And my big issue with that, is multiple platforms at the moment are American, and I have serious reservations about American ethics and morality. That's the broad truth of it. Most Europeans think vaguely similar. Indians feel vaguely similar to Europeans, although there are some interesting differences. Americans, they put right over as being more important than collective responsibility, for example. And Europeans have no problem with that. So I have an issue with that. How do we assess what the morality of our AIs are when they start giving us answers? And I go back to your example of the chap on the train. The kinds of answers it's getting are driven by, typically US-driven ethics, and that may not be in that individual's best interests. Normally it would be if it was, Australian ethics or Chinese ethics or Russian ethics. So I'm really careful about that. I'll still question again. I'll see if I can actually answer the point you made rather than setting the context for it.
This specific American context, right? It is a very interesting point, right? For example, Europe is known for a very strict GDPR and other compliances. And it comes at a cost because it slows things down or it increases the cost of the entire application. But on the other hand, it ensures that there is no PI information that is getting leaked, etc. So where is the balance, right? Because for certain areas where, like for example, AI, it has to move fast, otherwise it will die, right? It has to get more data. It has to be very fresh because a lot of people are banking on AI as such, and they are building very heavy enterprise grade applications to an extent that was not even possible some time back. So,
Absolutely.
what is the balance that is missing specifically with the ethical context?
There does need to be a balance. And I've also said to many people, I've been in technology one way or another all my life. From junior school, I've been interested in technology and science. AI is moving faster than anything else we've seen before. If I go on a holiday for 2 weeks, it takes me a month just to get back to a position, the level of knowledge that I had before. It's actually scary quick. I'm not scared of AI per se, the singularity, AI taking over the world. I don't think that's where the threat is. The threat is that we allow the technology to move so quickly that it disrupts our social and economic models to an extent that we can't recover from that. So we can't move at pace at the expense of safety and governance. There needs to be a balance. I understand that, but the organizations behind AI need to demonstrate, improvements, constant rapid improvements, because their investors expect that. But if they move too fast, they will exceed the ability of organizations, whether those are companies or nations, to adopt the technologies. And if they go too far, that will also damage their economic model. So we need to make sure that the pace of change of the tech is appropriate to the ability for the users of that tech to assimilate it. Otherwise, the technology itself, AI in this case, will become irrelevant.
I appreciate your thought process here, don't get me wrong, because I think the base point that is coming out is like, who decides
Yeah.
what's right? And in this case, there is no sort of guardrails on, or this set of governance on how do we go about it. It started to happen now, and it's happening very fast. But who decides? Like, for example, the news, like, polls being rigged, or the information getting ahead of the game, and there are a lot of AI simulations that are running in. And one of the recent examples that we all know, that Anthropic's original model was used for Venezuela, politically. So I understand all those geopolitical impacts of it, but specifically when it comes to technology, I'll give you another example, practical example that I learned very early in my days, was that there is a huge dam that was built in India, on the northern part of India,
Mhm.
and it's known as Tehri Dam, right? And in the Tehri Dam, before that was built, the biggest dam was Bhakra Nangal, if I am not incorrect, 100%. So in the making of Bhakra Nangal took decades, right?
Mhm.
And reason was very simple, right? So every time they have these joints in the concrete, right? They would use a technology known as DPT for every joint. So
Okay.
it's a dye penetration testing. You put a color and then you figure out whether
Yeah.
it's rubber, right? And they did it for entire thing. So the cost ballooned up like anything, and it took them decades. And when JP was creating Terry, they came up with a sampling test of the same sort, DPT. So instead of
Yes.
doing it at every joint,
Yeah.
they will
Statistically, it's a
they will do
statistical
samples.
control type approach. Yeah.
Yeah, and they work on probability. The balance that we are talking about, who decides? This is a very classic problem statement which has been through and through from the very start, right? But it's a very good point that you have raised. And as part of the ethics that you're working with the organizations and whatnot, I think that definitely must be a very important point that you always talk about when anybody is trying to get AI implemented.
I think we're seeing, you're seeing those considerations, the ethics and the responsible AI piece also evolving. When the soft models came out, there were all sorts of stories about them doing wrong things. And so many companies adopted the responsible AI framework. Microsoft were part of that, but there were a bunch of companies that did that. And that did things like saying, we need to check that we're training our AIs responsibly, and the data we're feeding isn't intrinsically biased, and doing all those things, and standard guardrails. I mean, one of the things that Microsoft did when they invested in OpenAI was they helped develop the guardrails on OpenAI, because OpenAI kind of didn't have any. You could ask it anything you liked and it would tell you exactly what it thought. So, we are seeing organizations, particularly ethical organizations, doing their responsible AI thing, but that's down at the technology level. What we're now beginning to see is a need for very responsible AI to happen at a social and a national or even multinational level. So we're sorting responsibility around responsible AI escalating as the technology starts to have wide-reaching impacts. And so, Europe has just passed its AI legislation, and the next impactful part of that start to come into play in July, August this year. And that's global. It is globally manifested. So if you're in the US, you use an AI to do something to or on a European citizen, the European legislature can go after you. So we're seeing that happening. Because, as you quite rightly said, they're one of the quicker people to legislate. Europe is one of slower to legislate, or varies by state. The UK sits somewhere in between, but I think that we will tend to adopt the European legislation pending the UK rejoining the EU at some point. So, I think we'll see that evolve as well. As the reach of AI and the potency of AI becomes more manifest and more impactful, countries will respond to that by putting in more governance and control at that level as well. So, but there will be lag and mistakes will be made in the meantime. And and as you said, there's the other present. There's two major issues. We know that military forces, the US being a particular case in point, will use these tools to do things that are morally and ethically dubious. We also know that there are bad actors in the world. We don't need to name which countries they are because they're pretty obvious, who will ignore all of the international decisions and do bad things with technology, just as I've always done with technology. It's not the technology's fault, it's the bad people's fault. And so I'm going back to something we said earlier, right at the start of this morality and ethics issue, as I said, people are flawed, and flawed people use tools to do bad things. My view is, actually, we could be using AI as part of the solution to that. I've been arguing for a while that every boardroom, every board should have an AI in there that is being trained in the business principles and ethics of the company and is required to hold directors and the chair and CEO to account for the business decisions they make to do in line with the principles that they've laid out. And we should do the same at national and multinational level. That we should be using AIs to advise us on whether what we're doing is ethically acceptable, because AIs, for all of our flaws, are not emotional. They will give objective. They might be wrong, but they'll do objectively wrong positions on things as opposed to emotionally wrong. And I think that interaction between people with their intuition and their insights and their drive, and AI with their statistical objectivity, means that we can probably do better things than either of us can do alone.
Quite interesting. I think this solution can be very exhaustive, right? It can have ethics, it can have emotional EQ, or EQ as we call it, built in. Plus, it can also have certain guardrails that can be built in to have an independent voice on the board to see how the company is doing. There are exhaustive use cases that we can actually bring in, but it's a very nice and fair point. One last thing before we move on to the healthcare, which is something that I'm very passionate about, Simon, is in your conferences, in your communication with fellow MVPs, what percentage of time does this ethical conversation around AI takes overall?
Well, I tend to raise it a lot because I think it's something of concern. It's top of mind for me. I think most developers don't think about it, and that's not a criticism. That's because that's not their job. I think that they should, in the same way, all think about building in, security controls and governance controls. There ought to be a part of the development process that looks at the ethics, but that would be really the developer's job. It should be the program managers or the organizations themselves. But so it doesn't come up that often, other than going in the weeds and saying, let's just think about, where did your data to train this model come from? Do you have the rights to that data? Is the data fair, balanced, and appropriately governed and that level, I think that there is some level ahead to doing the right thing. it probably isn't as robust as it should be. But developers getting involved in that level. Bigger social, socio-ethical positions, I think, are more my domain than theirs.
This topic is really wide, isn't it? Like every time I'm trying to move on to the next one, there is one or the other question that just pops up in my mind. Like, for example, these data centers that we all are building now, right? And there are bigger models that are coming up, right? Is it taking us towards an AI revolution, or is it taking us towards an energy crisis? Like, when do we reach?
Yes, unregulated, and it's taking us towards both. I have always pushed back a bit because all the news headlines around data centers talk about how much energy they're using. And those are not wrong, but it's a very narrow view on it. Right now, the majority of data center operations are not AI. So in other words, if you take all the energy used by all the data centers in the world, just over half of it is still being used for things like cloud services and all the stuff that we were doing prior to 2023. So we need to be careful about not saying AI is the evil one in the room, because we were also using the same technologies only without AI before. The other thing is that the good guys, people like Microsoft, are actively ensuring that their data centers are as green as they can make them. Sometime in 2024, Microsoft made an announcement that by the end of 2025, all of their data centers would run on renewable energy. And by the end of 2025, they achieved that. And they're in data centers as well. However, there are nuances. Of course, not all of the energy that goes into those data centers are coming from renewables. Sometimes Microsoft are buying carbon credits or whatever to balance the books. But that's still okay. But we should, going back to the legal thing, have a requirement that all new data centers have matching renewable energy sources, so that we're not consuming more coal, gas, and oil in order to run the AIs. If we do that, then my conscience is relatively clean using AI the way that I do.
No, absolutely right. And there is this recent quote by Sridhar Vembu, who's the founder and chairperson of Zoho companies, right? Zoho
Yes.
is actually scaling very fast. So what he quoted in a very recent chat was that the cost of data centers and is primarily rising. The reason is because of the memory, and the cost is being driven because of the AI, right?
Yeah.
Now, what he's saying is that it is a bootstrapped company, then it's fine. They can work with less profits, less margins. But if it is a publicly vested company, they have to showcase their margins and profits to the investors. So now, since one is sustainable portion of this, the other is, of course, what we call it as the financial or monetary part of it. So if AI is not 100% contributor towards the energy crisis, maybe we were actually going all along towards that process with the existing setup. But the second portion is, of course, the costs of, just like how AI has started giving back the cost to the consumers, right?
Yeah.
Similarly, the known AI data centers, there also the classic SaaS applications will start getting costlier.
Yes.
Right. So this is a conundrum. I think there is no 100% positive spin on this. Somewhere I feel that we are going down to a path with very little calculation at the end of the day, exactly where we'll land. Is that
where it will take us? The future is always a bit challenging. But I ran the numbers. This is pre-AI, but I ran the numbers because I remember hearing people complaining about data centers and their energy consumption, pre-2023, and I looked at all the services that were being used in the cloud at the time, and if those same services had been being used in individual, not data centers, but individual on-premise server farms. Forget the numbers, but the energy consumption would have been something like 40% greater than the cloud model, because of our efficiencies of scale. So, if we, back in those bad old days when we had, 8-box SharePoint server farms that they moved to were pro rata, because no economies of scale, no efficient sharing of processes and all that kind of stuff. So I think if we're going to use AI, putting it out to data centers and running it locally may not be the right answer, because that will actually probably increase energy consumption. But there's absolutely a problem with this thing called Jevons paradox, which is that as you make things cheaper and better, as you make them more efficient, so because we're doing some really clever stuff to make the processing power, per watt go down on AI processors. As that gets better, Jevons paradox says the consumption goes up and your net energy consumption still goes up, because it becomes so cheap and so good and so quick, you use it for more things. And I think we're absolutely seeing that driving the explosion of AI at the moment. And one of the measures to deal with that is to put the prices up. And so we certainly are going to see, I predict, the cost of AI starting to be pushed back to the consumer. Right now, Copilot, ChatGPT, Claude, because end consumer isn't paying for that. I think at some point they're going to have to.
I'm just waiting for that PC of the new era. I don't know whether you saw that one-line statement from both Microsoft and NVIDIA. I think both of them are working together to come up with a new sort of a PC altogether with the latest chips. Let me shift some gears now from energy to healthcare, right? So one was that we talked about was, a must have, good to have an efficient system, ethical system, right? But to healthcare, where you can easily see quick wins, you save a lot of lives, you see the impact immediately then and there, right? You have been working, you are consulting NHS for a very long time. And I think you did create a system that prevented around about 100,000 patients from going to hospital, right?
Yeah.
So what was, I know there are a lot of things that are broken in the healthcare system everywhere across, but what do you think specifically, and what are the different use cases that you still think is available now for the entrepreneurs to pick?
So I think it's a massive space. Yeah, so we could do like this for hours. Once you're a start, I mean, I guess the first thing is we've had AI in some form in healthcare for a very long time. Again, we would have called it data science and machine learning, and even before that, we had predictive algorithms and lots of AI use, just not as powerful as we have now. So it's not new. Having said that, the NHS in the UK and healthcare systems around the world have generally been very cautious about the adoption of such things. And the problem there is being able to demonstrate compliance. OIs are black boxes. You give them some inputs, you get some outputs. What happens inside, you cannot track. So you don't know how those neural networks actually come to the decisions they do. And that makes validation of input to output basically impossible. And most clinical processes and the medical devices, including technology, IT technology that you build, need to be validated. So you've got a problem there. So health services have always had a governance compliance issue with being able to adopt AI. The company I founded, Canalta, we were doing, as you say, some pretty cool things with being able to prevent referrals to hospitals. We desperately wanted to be able to use machine learning against the data, because we managed to reduce wait times from typically 13 weeks to 2 days. We think we could have taken it down to about an hour if we'd been allowed to use AI, but it would have required us to have permission to use clinical patient data through an AI. It would have been our own AI. We wouldn't be pushing it out to OpenAI or anything like that. That didn't exist then, but we couldn't have used a platform. But even running our own AI within a controlled environment was something that the health services were extremely reluctant to do.
So, Simon, I definitely support AI in healthcare, and specifically in here, there are a lot of solutions that have been created, whether it is connected care, whether it is remote therapeutic monitoring, whether it is SLM, which is giving them some sort of a very specific use cases that are built around SLMs.
Yep.
But in a country like UK, where, please correct me if I'm wrong, because I may not have the on-ground reality pictures, but in country like UK, when getting an appointment with GP is slightly tougher, how will an SLM or how will an AI solution help? Because for an immediate care, you generally have to be in a queue and you have to wait for getting a GP appointment. Is it true?
It's true. I mean, there are exceptions. Often it's hard to get a GP's appointment, but as I discovered myself, sadly, 2 weeks ago, when you need appointments in a hurry, I've got a pulmonary embolism at the moment, and which is quite shocking, really. So it's quite serious. But I called my doctor and I spoke to somebody and said, I've got this condition. They called me back within an hour, did a telephone assessment. An hour later, I was actually in the GP surgery talking to somebody, and 2 hours later, I was in emergency daycare. So, so the process isn't terribly broken. What it is not very good for people who haven't got emergency needs. And the more emergency needs there are, the slower it is for everybody else to get seen. So there is an opportunity for AIs to do initial triage. And it won't be perfect, but it probably will be better than people having to wait to be seen. And this is also our model we've come out at. What we need to do is shorten the period of time it takes to get some kind of effective care. It may not be perfect care, but the quicker you get some kind of effective care, the better the clinical outcomes. And so I think that AI has a really powerful story to play in that. The issue is one of who owns the data. And by the data, I mean my personal health record. There is an awful lot of sensitivity around use of personal clinical data. The UK has arguably the best joined up personal health data in the world. We're not one of the countries that can make the claim we maybe have the biggest set because it's a national health system. It is pretty well joined up. There is the NHS spine. We have all of that data potentially available to train AIs on. And before that, machine learning algorithms, and before that, and for 15 years, we have decided not to deploy it in a way that allows us to do that at scale. Palantir, who have been in the news this week, have been getting access to some of that. Whether you agree with that is a judgment. I have reservations about Palantir as a company, but I do think that with the right safeguards, we absolutely should be using large clinical data sets to train AIs and other models in order to allow us to get not only better general care, but in order to be able to develop personalized care models that look at specific, more specific cases and generate better clinical outcomes. I think that is the only ethical way of doing it. Denying nations the right to provide personalized care based on large data sets.
With this, could this be a scenario? Okay, just it's a fun one. Okay, in next 20 years, right? Will patient trust AI more for their diagnosis or the physician?
So we have to talk in general terms because 15% of people don't trust anything. Right, for actual facts. And again, there is a cultural variance on that. You look at the number of portion of Americans who don't believe feeds which are evidently true. It's rather terrifying. Europe and India is a bit more grounded. But as well, so I think that we absolutely should expect to see people. Okay, I'm going to phrase this differently. I think the bigger problem is if we don't enable people to trust official, well-trained, well-governed AIs, those people will be left open to the unofficial, dangerous stuff.
Right.
So, we've got to do it because it's a better tool. It's a way of actually addressing clinical needs that are already problematic and cannot be solved by throwing more people at it. We can't throw more people at it because we don't have more well-trained people to do it. There's an ongoing issue in the UK and indeed all of the wealthier nations that we drag highly trained clinical people out of the poorer countries to come and work here, which means that the poorer countries don't have those well-trained clinical people. And then there's an issue of ethics. So we've got to use whatever tools are at our disposal to solve these ethical clinical problems, and we should do that using AI.
We actually dissected energy sector, we dissected healthcare. Of course, we have scratched the surface because both of these industries are so huge. We can have X number of podcasts around it. But what we take out of this conversation, one, is from healthcare, there can be better AI triaging. specifically in countries like UK, where GP's availability is driven based on the emergency care, right?
Yeah.
Second thing is we can maybe potentially come up with some sort of a SLM model which can help the consultant come up with more ammo, can diagnose faster, accurate, and come up with a resolution more fast.
Things that they would have missed on their own.
Absolutely correct. And third, by far the most important, what I feel based on what you have told us, is that the conversation shouldn't be we should not use AI, but how should we use AI
That's
in
it.
a more thoughtful fashion so that we can take this learning and expand it to a bigger audience set so that we can help resolve problems which are not getting resolved right now. Which brings me to my final section, which is with this current world and the way the speed is humongous, we are moving very fast. So, what do you recommend to a person who is just coming fresh out of the college? What will be your guidance? How do they choose their career path and what should they learn? Specifically with respect to tech.
Yeah, I mean, it's referring, the wider social condition. AI and robotics are going to change a lot of things in all societies over the next 30 years. So some of those impacts will happen within 10. So, the world is changing. I've researched this. Yes, there will be changes in jobs. People will lose their jobs, but that's always been the case with new technologies. When the car replaced the horse, there were over, I forget the numbers, but it's something like 15% of British people in the 1900s were employed in the horse management industry.
Oh.
The cars came along, and within 20 years, that industry had completely disappeared. So it's always been the case. Technologies displace people, but it's also always been the case that those changes have generated more jobs in new industries than they remove. I do have concerns that AI will take away jobs forever and not create new ones. So that's something we need to think about. There's all the context there that people coming out of college and university who are highly qualified may still not have a job to go to because the world has changed. So until we start reducing our populations. In terms of what skills do you have? That's really, really tough. And the first thing I tell people is if you want to have a rock star role over the next 10 years, one where you're earning the big money, you probably shouldn't be doing it in an industry where you think for a living. But ones that people who genuinely can think outside the box and probably can join multiple knowledge domains. We talked about this a bit at the beginning. I mean, I've got this weird background where I have probably 3, 4, maybe 5 areas that I'm a subject matter expert in, and they're unrelated. And I can join those things together to do interesting things. So I think that the role of journalists will become more important because journalists can use ORs to supplement their knowledge, have more critical thinking skills to make sure the AI knowledge is correct, and then join into other domains. Ask interesting, difficult questions of AIs that people with only single domains can't ask. So that's part of it, is multi-skilling people, making sure that they've got multiple areas of knowledge. And then I think, the ability to think, analyze, ask creatively insightful questions is a major skill. Well, there was an analysis of this. People are doing some skills maps. I'm a bit rusty. I haven't looked at one of those for about 18 months. But we have looked at skills maps for the university that I do some pro bono lectures for. And definitely it's really rapidly changing. And lots of old things about agility, horizon scanning, adaptability. Those are skills which are going to be in most demand. People coming out of university today with great skills, almost all of their technical skills are almost already redundant.
Very sane advice, Simon. And I think what I am able to get from this is like just to maybe immaturely summarize it, because I know if the generation that we are talking to right now, they really like one-liners at the end of the day. But what I think what I understood primarily is that we need to move out from the specific tech mindset to problem solving mindset, which we will get in industries, whether it is a blue collar industry, whether it is healthcare, whether it is energy sector, whether it is something else. We go there, we understand the problem statement, and then technology is reaching to a stage where it is started becoming slightly irrelevant, where it can become your additional asset. All you need to understand is where are you going to apply this technology to. Is that some sort of a
I think that's fair. Yes, yes.
uh,
If there is a body of work or good practice, then any job that relies on that body of work, body of knowledge, will be replaceable by AI.
hmm.
People that can look across multiple bodies and join them together, those will be important. And there will continue to be a need for both researchers, because that's where the new knowledge comes from, and the people who integrate knowledge from multiple fields. So,
Mm. Interesting. So we'll close this podcast with rapid fire questions, Simon. I'm going to ask you three, four, five rapid fire. You have to give it in less than a sentence, if possible. And
which a good folks in the Zoe Health podcast do exactly that, but anyway, we did at the beginning. So, yes, hit me with it.
so my first question is one technology from Star Trek that has come true in your lifetime.
The first one is automatic doors. Can you automatic door? You can walk up to an automatic door and it opens. Those doors are opened by people back in the early days. Just reminded, but actually, more realistically, political communicators. Those were just those are such powerful things. And actually, I think we've gone beyond what Star Trek imagined. Our personal communicators are far more powerful than the ones they had in Star Trek.
So let me ask an add-on question, right? Which technology you would now want to see from Star Trek to come live in future?
Oh, that's easy. The one I want the most is anti-gravity. Just want that. I'd love faster than light technology, but anti-gravity. Give me that. We have for stars.
I think there will be a lot of repercussions of that. But my next question is, what would you tell your 40-year-old self?
I think it would come as no surprise to me back in my 40s, but also continue to embrace it.
Amazing. So on that note, Simon, thank you so much for the experience and exposure that you shared with us. This has been a very deeply and meaningful podcast that I've run for last so many days. And it definitely didn't go into technical depth of the execution or implementation, but it scratched through all the surfaces of different industries. What is going right in AI, what is going wrong in AI. And, one of the highlights of the entire podcast was this major statement that you made is that specifically in healthcare, it's not about whether we don't do it, but it's how we do it, or how do we ensure that our data is used thoughtfully for getting right AI use cases. Thank you so much, Simon. And it was pleasure talking to you. I'm sure that people will gain a lot of insights from this conversation.
I don't really appreciate you giving me an opportunity to hold forth on subjects that I think are important and interesting.
Thank you so much for your time, Simon. Really love talking to you again and speak to you very soon.
You look forward to it. Anything I can do, let me know.
Sure. Cheers, Simon. Thank you so much for your time.